This account comes from my new book, Hidden Haunts Ireland, a collection of lesser-known ghost stories and local legends from across the country. Each chapter uncovers hauntings that rarely make the guidebooks, and some that have never been put to print. Places where history, superstition, and the unexplained meet. From haunted country houses to roads with darker reputations, these are the stories that linger in whispers in local memory. This account takes us to County Waterford, to a house better known for its famous guests than its ghosts. But as with so many grand homes, it's the servants' stories, not the owners, that reveal what truly haunts the place. You can find Hidden Haunts Ireland on Amazon now, in paperback and Kindle editions. Ireland has produced its share of world-famous names. Writers like Oscar Wilde, poets such as W.B. Yeats, and political figures from Daniel O'Connell to Michael Collins. But few families carry as much recognition beyond Ireland as the Kennedys. The Kennedys' rise from Irish emigrant stock to the heights of American politics remains one of the most retold stories of the Irish diaspora, culminating in John F. Kennedy becoming the first Irish Catholic President of the United States in 1961. The Kennedy story in Ireland usually begins in County Wexford, where Patrick Kennedy left for Boston in the 1840s, during the worst years of the famine. His descendants built lives in America that few immigrants could have imagined, and generations later, when John F. Kennedy returned to Wexford in 1963 as president, it was hailed as a homecoming, not just for one family, but for the millions who'd left Ireland. This visit, marked by cheering crowds and emotional speeches, fixed the Kennedy name into Ireland's modern history as much as its American one. In Irish folklore, the Banshee is not just a mythical figure, but a deeply personal omen, said to appear only for certain families of ancient Gaelic stock. The Kennedys were counted among those for whom her cry might sound. To hear her wail was to know death was close, and though no specific story survives of a Kennedy death marked by it, the idea has often been linked to their lineage. Accounts from across Ireland give the Banshee a strange consistency. Sometimes she appeared as a pale woman at the window, sometimes as an old figure combing her hair at a riverbank, and more often she was heard rather than seen. Her keening could be faint and mournful, drifting across fields in the dead of night, or so piercing it rattled the nerves of entire households. In one famous case, the Reverend Charles Bunworth of County Cork was said to have been mourned by a banshee on the night of his death in the 18th century. Servants claimed to hear her wailing around the house, and even saw a ghostly form moving through the grounds before vanishing. Folklorist Patricia Lycett, writing much later, documented how belief in such cries persisted well into the 20th century, with people still claiming to have heard the sound before a family tragedy. For the Kennedys, the association with the Banshee tied their story to something older than politics or power, a reminder that even the most celebrated families couldn't escape from the old superstitions of Ireland. And it sets an uncanny backdrop to the return to the country generations later. Wexford was not their only Irish connection. Waterford too found its place in the Kennedy story. In 1967, Jackie Kennedy visited County Waterford with her children, staying at Woodstown House, a Regency-style mansion close to the wide sands of Woodstown Beach. It was only a few years after the assassination of her husband, and her presence in Ireland drew global attention. For locals, the visit cemented a sense of pride. The glamorous former First Lady choosing their stretch of coast as her retreat. Woodstown House itself dates back to the early 19th century. It was built for the Fitzgerald family, part of the Anglo-Irish gentry who dominated estates along the southeast coast. Their wealth came from land and trade, and the house was intended to reflect that influence. Tall sash windows, balanced Regency proportions, and views across gardens to the wide Strand below. Like many country houses of its kind, it was as much about presence as comfort, a statement that this family held its place among the landed class of Waterford. In later years the house was altered and extended, with wings and annexes added to suit changing tastes and practicalities, but its Regency core remained. Its position, slightly sheltered yet only a short walk from the sands of the beach, made it a sought-after retreat. Families could entertain guests, ride or walk along the shore and retreat to a property that combined genteel elegance with proximity to the sea. Like many of Ireland's big houses, Woodstown has gathered a variety of associations over time. It remembered both for the notable figures who stayed there and for its role as a symbol of status and prosperity. Alongside those memories, local tradition has also attached stories that add a more mysterious edge to its history. The next account was told to me by a close friend I've known for over 30 years, Chrissie. She recalled to me a time staying at Woodstown in the early 2000s, when she worked there as a carer. Originally from Scotland, Chrissie also has family ties to Ireland, and it was through those connections that she found herself in the house, where she would experience something she's never forgotten. Chrissie remembers the journey to the house as much as what followed. She'd been living in Cork at the time, waiting for her nursing registration to be finalised, and in the meantime had taken work as a carer. The agency sent her to Waterford, where she was met in town by a driver, and from there she was taken out into the countryside. The road wound further and further away from the bustle of the city, until it narrowed to a long, tree-lined drive. At the far end, the house finally came into view. It wasn't like the farmhouses or small cottages she'd known before. This was vast, a place that looked more like a hotel than a family home. Tall sash windows, typical of Regency houses, seemed to stare back at her as the car pulled up. Inside, the scale was even more striking. The main staircase rose steeply to a landing, and off it, 4 large bedrooms ran the length of the upper floor. Each room was decorated in its own style, rich colours, heavy curtains, and each with its own ensuite bathroom. It felt less like she'd walked into someone's home, and more like she'd checked into an old-fashioned guest house. Though nothing happened that first night, she felt a strange uneasiness. No noises, no incidents, just what she called a tension in the air, as if the house itself was holding its breath. She kept the light on until she drifted into a restless sleep, and later she'd look back and think of it as her first warning. At the time she put it down to nerves, the strangeness of working in a new house, but even then she knew something about the place was off. Something about it didn't feel right. Chrissie soon settled into a routine. Her role was to care for the elderly woman of the house, who lived there with her daughter-in-law. The son, she was told, was often away on business, which left the place unusually quiet for such a vast home. The house itself never really felt welcoming or comfortable. Even when nothing stirred, there was a sense of space being too large, of rooms hiding more than their share of silence. The kitchen in particular left her feeling very uncomfortable. She couldn't explain why, but each time she stepped into it, she felt like she was being watched. At times, it was as though somebody had just left or was about to enter. The feeling grew stronger the longer she stayed, and it was in the kitchen that she often caught herself hurrying her work just to be done with the place. After a week, Chrissie moved from one of the big upstairs bedrooms into one of the newer annex apartments joined onto the house. They were self-contained, each with their own bathroom, but built in the shadow of the main house. The energy followed her there too. She remembers lying in bed one night, trying to convince herself there was nothing to fear, when the hairs on her arms rose and she felt a chill settle over her. She forced herself to stay calm, but the feeling of an invisible presence in the room was strong enough that she left a lamp on beside her bed until morning. At that stage, she hadn't been told any of the house's stories. No warnings, no mention of ghosts. The strangeness she felt seemed to belong only to her. Looking back now, she realises that the others in the house must have known more than he said. It wasn't until the very end of her stay that Chrissie discovered she hadn't been imagining things. On her last day, as she was preparing to leave Waterford to catch her bus, she briefly mentioned her experiences to the gardener who was giving her a lift. Almost offhand, she told him about the strange feeling she had in the kitchen and the odd atmosphere in the house. His reaction was immediate. "Ah, so you felt it too." He went on to explain that years earlier, a murder had apparently taken place in the kitchen, a detail never spoken of openly in the house, but whispered among the staff. And suddenly Chrissie's dread of that room made sense. The gardener had his own stories too. On occasion, when the family needed him early the next morning, he would stay overnight in the annex, the same block of rooms where Chrissie had slept. They were simple little rooms, each with 2 single beds and nothing more. One night he woke suddenly, unsure what had disturbed him. At first he lay still, listening. The house was quiet. The only sound, the faint tick of the pipes cooling after the day. His eyes adjusted slowly to the dark, and that was when he realised he wasn't alone. In the other bed, across the room, there was a shape. He blinked, squinting, telling himself it was a pile of covers or a trick of the shadows. But the longer he stared, the more certain he became. It was a man, lying on his side, perfectly still, looking directly at him. The details came into focus bit by bit. The pale cast of a face, the dark hollows where the eyes should have been, the fixed stare that seemed to look directly into him. The figure didn't move, it didn't speak, it just lay there, as if waiting for him to notice. He described a rush of cold going through him, a kind of horror that made his whole body tense. It wasn't the shock of an intruder, it was worse. The sense that what he was looking at wasn't living at all. He didn't stop to think. Throwing back the covers, he bolted for the door, fumbling with the handle in his panic before escaping into the night. He never slept in that room again. There were other accounts too. The elderly woman Chrissie was caring for once described waking with a start in the middle of the night to find her bedclothes being dragged from her. At first she thought she must have kicked them loose in her sleep, but when she tried to pull them back up, the resistance was unmistakable, as though invisible hands were tugging against her. She said the sheets slid steadily downwards, uncovering her bit by bit, until she was left shivering in the dark. Shaken, she reached for the lamp but found nothing there, only the weight of the empty room pressing in. By the time she'd gathered the courage to sit up and grope for the covers, they lay crumpled at the foot of her bed, almost like they'd been thrown there deliberately. Chrissie's friend Catherine later worked in the house and claimed to see more than anyone else. Walking up the long driveway one evening, Catherine saw 2 figures approaching, She greeted them, waving, only to realise that as they drew closer, they were floating slightly above the ground. They were also dressed in clothes not of the time. A man and a woman, silent, watching her. Inside the house, Catherine would hear tapping, the whispering voices of a man and a woman, and sometimes she would even speak aloud to whatever was in the room with her. She found acknowledging their presence was the only way she could live with it. For Chrissie, the stories explained everything. The atmosphere in the kitchen, the chill in her room, the constant sense of being watched. This was proof it wasn't just her imagination. Others had felt it. Others had seen it. The house was carrying something from its past, and anyone who stayed there for too long was forced to reckon with it. What struck Chrissie most was how widely that unease was recognised. It wasn't just the gardener or our friend Catherine who spoke of it. Locals too had their own ways of pointing out that the house was not ordinary. She remembered a tale from a local lady saying that her horses would never go near the place. When ridden along the strand, the animals would shy away from the path leading up to the gates, as though something in the air warned them off. There were hints of reputation even in the landscape itself. Chrissie recalled seeing spray paint on a wall nearby the property, scrawled warnings about the ghosts of Woodstown. Crude perhaps, but a reminder that the stories had made their way beyond the grounds and into the wider community. The house had become one of those places spoken about in half-serious tones, where everybody knew something had happened, even if the details were blurred with rumour. And what tied it all together was the link to the Kennedys. Photographs in one of the rooms showed their connection to Woodstown, and the knowledge that such a famous family had stayed there only made the haunting seem stranger. For a house tied to glamour and history, to also carry whispers of murder and restless spirits was jarring. Yet that contradiction is what gave Chrissie's experience its edge. A place both celebrated and shunned, proud yet fearful. Even years later, telling me her story, Chrissie admitted just thinking of the kitchen brought back the feeling. As she spoke to me, the hairs on her arms stood up, as if her body still remembered what her mind was trying to describe. It was almost as if she was reliving that moment, the same prickle of unease, the same sense that she wasn't alone in that room. The house had made an impression that time cannot erase. Woodstown is not a house that turns up in lists of Ireland's haunted places. In that sense, it reminds us of other overlooked houses I've come across, places where rumours circulate locally, but never make it into guidebooks. Sites like Springhill in County Londonderry carry similar private traditions, stories that exist more in family memory than in published accounts. Unlike Loftus Hall or Charleville Castle, it has no reputation in guidebooks or ghost tours, and I could find no other written reports of hauntings here, nor any record of the supposed murder in the kitchen. So what survives are fragments. A spray-painted warning on a wall, a gardener's confession, the feeling carried years later by somebody who stayed within its rooms. And that's what makes Chrissie's account so important. As I've said, I've known her for more than 30 years, and the way she still reacts, hairs rising, voice catching, as if she were back in that kitchen, is not something you can fake. And these are the hauntings that I look for, personal, unsettling, and tied to places most would pass without a thought. That they survive only in memory and whispered recollection makes them all the more compelling. Woodstown's story, like so many old houses, depends on who's telling it. For most people it's remembered as the Kennedy Retreat, a symbol of the connection between Ireland and America, and a moment of light after grief. That version endures because it's the one written down, photographed and repeated. but a different story runs alongside it, told only in passing, and it belongs to the people who worked there, carers, gardeners, house staff, the ones who felt something watching them long after the guests had left. In grand houses, silence often outlives truth. What can't be spoken about becomes part of the fabric, a tension in the rooms, a weight in the air. And maybe that's why stories like Chrissie's survive, because when history forgets the living, the places themselves seem to remember. And Woodstown was built to show status, not shelter fear, yet the fear is what's lasted. Long after the cameras left, the house still holds the emotions of those who couldn't speak about what they saw. It's a reminder that memory doesn't always follow the lines of power. History may remember the names on the deeds, but hauntings remember everyone else.